the path of ThreeI Atlas takes it closest to Jupiter on March 16th, 2026. And it's possible to forecast the distance that it will have from Jupiter on March 16th. Turns out that this distance, to within 4 significant digits, is exactly the distance from Jupiter where Jupiter's gravity wins over the Sun's gravity.
Avi Loeb goes on the Danny Jones show and he gives a crazy update on ThreeI Atlas and explains why it is so fascinating, why it is so important, what is going on with ThreeI Atlas, and why are so many people hiding something? And is NASA hiding something?
That now we are starting to find interstellar objects, meaning objects that came from other stars and reached the inner solar system. And so even if these are just rocks, if we were to design an interceptor, a mission that lands on such a rock, brings a sample back to Earth, we would be able to study the building blocks of potential life around other stars. I'm saying even if it's just if ThreeI Atlas is just a natural rock, just imagine a rock the size of a city. We know that it's about 5 kilometers or so, or maybe even bigger. First, it's a big object. Second, this one actually moves in the plane of the planets around the sun, which offers an ideal opportunity for us to intercept it and land on it. However, we didn't know about it in advance. I calculated, I wrote a paper that I published shortly after it was discovered, that in fact, there is a spacecraft around Jupiter called Juno that was launched by NASA. And if they kept the original fuel that it had, they could have used it to intercept, to actually collide with ThreeI Atlas on March 16th, when it will come closest to Jupiter.
Wow.
But they used most of the fuel, so they can't do it. But it illustrates the fact that if you detect an object like ThreeI Atlas early enough, you can intercept it or land on it. And
how fast is that ThreeI Atlas moving?
It entered the solar system at 60 kilometers per second. So coming back to the NASCAR race, it's faster than the fastest car we have by a factor of 600. 600 times faster.
And you can land on that?
Well, it depends how you design.
I feel like if something would hit that, it would completely be destroyed. Like, you would need some crazy technology for that. I feel like it would just explode if it hit it. It is very fascinating that they're starting to get other interstellar objects from a different solar system, and I wonder if that does have any role with the end time scenarios. I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
I mean, you can definitely cross its path, but then obviously the spacecraft will be demolished as a result of the impact. It could send us close-up photographs.
Right before it gets incinerated.
But there are also situations where, for example, if the interstellar object comes on an orbit that is not that fast and actually goes behind the Earth, then it would be relatively easy to land on it, bring something to Earth. So my point is, this is a frontier, a window into the universe that was never explored, because astronomers always focused on remote observing, using telescopes to look far out. Nowadays, we also use gravitational wave detectors to look at the universe. It doesn't matter. In both cases, we're looking at very distant sources, trying to infer what is out there. It's just like you are in a home, in your home, at a house, on the street. You see many houses similar to yours, and you look at them through the window with telescopes, let's say. So you can learn if they have microbes, for example. But it's very different than getting a physical object that came from a neighbor's yard that you can study. If it's a rock, you can learn what the neighbor's yard has. If it's a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor, you can learn about the neighbor. And maybe the neighbor will come and knock on your front door. That's the other possibility that we have to contemplate. We haven't really considered what to do if there is a visit by alien technology that could pose a threat to humanity. People would say it's very small probability that this would happen. First, they don't know how to calibrate. We don't know how much traffic there is of interstellar technological objects. But secondly, we don't have a protocol for how to deal with that. And, The intelligence agencies always have a protocol for how to deal with black swan events. These are events that have small probability but big impact on society.
This is all very interesting. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on my opinion and your opinion on this, because when we read the Bible about certain things that were happening and how we see the world, when people start talking about aliens from outer space, from different universes and galaxies, for me, I see that as less likely. First of all, because the Bible doesn't talk about it. The Bible talks about interdimensional beings, supernatural beings, things from the unseen realm, which necessarily it's not talking about outer space. It's talking about just in a completely different realm outside of time and reality. Is so different than what we can comprehend. That's what the Bible is seemingly talking about, not about beings from outer space. That's just what it seems like. And based off of evidence within society and our culture and things that we've seen, it almost every time seems like that is more likely what is going on. Something from the unseen realm, something from interdimensional things, beings, because that's what the Bible talks about. Like, not everything is just physical. There's a spiritual world in a physical world. So what are your guys' thoughts?
The reason you need to deal with them is because even if you say it's unlikely, the impact would be huge. And therefore you must have a way of collecting information that would basically neutralize the threat. And serious people in government, in the intelligence agencies, always spend a lot of resources on events that never materialize. We don't know about it. They may have prevented some disasters, like terrorist attacks, but it's part of the rational thing to do. And scientists, on the other hand, do not understand that, because if a scientist says, at the 99% confidence, I know that ThreeI Atlas is a rock or a comet. Even if you say that at the 99%, fine, that is okay when you deal with interpretation of events that have no impact on society. Like you deal with a galaxy far away, an exploding star far away, no impact on our future. However, when you deal with something coming to our backyard, you can't just say 99%, it's a rock and therefore we shouldn't even worry about it. Because if you take the 1% chance that it might be alien technology and multiply it by the potential impact on the future of humanity, you get a huge number. So what you have to do, our duty as scientists, is to collect as much data as possible to figure out whether there are any anomalies, anything that looks strange and we can't explain it, that might be indicative of technology. And that's my point. My point is we have to mature, scientists have to mature and realize that in this case, there are political, financial, societal implications, and therefore they cannot use the procedure of saying at some high likelihood this is well understood. And that's what NASA did basically in a recent press conference. They said, it's a rock. It's a rock, don't worry about it. The point is that the nature of the object should not be decided by NASA officials. It should be decided by scientists that analyze the data. And I would much rather have, at this press conference, scientists talking about it and explaining why this or that facts are indications that this is not technological.
I've heard also ideas of they're preparing society for the rapture to happen. But I don't think they believe in the rapture. They're praying for society for Jesus to come so they can say it's aliens who took away Christians. I've heard people say that. But I highly doubt they're preparing society for that.
Like me, and I doubt there's many that don't know what ThreeI Atlas is. But can you explain give us a basic rundown of what exactly it is and how you discovered it? And why is it called ThreeI Atlas?
I didn't discover it. I just paid attention to it.
Okay.
So ThreeI Atlas is the third interstellar object. So that's why you have ThreeI. Atlas is the name of the telescope in Chile that discovered it, only 0.5 meter in size. Every day now, when I write on medium.com and reports about ThreeI Atlas, and every day you can see images of ThreeI Atlas taken by 0.5 meter telescopes that are owned by amateurs, with at a cost of, thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. Compare that to the instruments used by NASA that cost altogether billions of dollars. Nevertheless, the information in those images taken by amateurs now is much greater than in the NASA images at the press conference that we heard about. But ThreeI Atlas was discovered on July 1st, and it was very bright. And July 1st is just 3 days before the July 4th holiday. That's important because my wife wanted to go on a vacation, and I immediately realized this object is bright. It's the fact that a 0.5 meter telescope saw it at a distance of 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation means that it's a very bright, very big object. And I calculated that if it's the brightness of this object is as a result of reflection of sunlight from a solid body, it has to be 20 kilometers in diameter, which is the size of Manhattan Island, the length. That's a huge object. That's comparable to the size of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. These are extremely rare things. So then, as we got to the vacation place, I immediately did a calculation and argued that there is not enough rocky material in interstellar space to deliver such a big package over the past decade, because this survey went only for 1 decade. And you would expect it once per 10,000 years. Now, you might say, oh, well, maybe, it's a rare object that happens to come by. That's obviously possible, but at a probability of 0.1% or so, or less. And then, so that was the first anomaly that struck me,
The size.
The mass. So it's a million times more massive than the first interstellar object discovered in 2017 called Oumuamua. That was the size of a football field. So compare the size of a city to the size of a football field. That's the difference in size. And the mass goes like size cubed.
And how do we determine that mass again? What is the calculation there?
Oh, it's just you take the size, the diameter, let's say, and cube it, multiply by the typical density of a solid, and you get the mass. And in both cases, and irrespective, if you use the same density for both objects, which is solid density, about 1 gram per cubic centimeter, you get a large size of order 5 kilometers or bigger for ThreeI Atlas. So it's at least 1,000 times more massive than the second interstellar object called the Borisov, which was found back in 2019, and 1 million times more massive than Oumuamua, which was found in 2017. So that's, by itself, it's an anomaly. Why? Because I wrote in my paper, I said, either the object itself is much smaller than we think. Maybe there is a very dense plume of gas and dust around it that reflects sunlight, and the object itself, the nucleus, is much smaller. That would be then that would relieve the tension in terms of the size or the mass. And the second possibility is that if it's so big, maybe it targeted the inner solar system. It was not drawn from the reservoir of rocks in interstellar space. And this was my last sentence. Maybe it targeted the inner solar system. The editor of the journal, and that was just a few days after the object was discovered, the editor said, I will publish this paper only if you remove this last sentence.
They said that they would not publish it unless you removed the last sentence.
Yes.
It's interesting, though, that they're trying to hide it. I don't understand that. Why are they trying to hide the possibility? Do they think it's just crazy, or it's just so out of the possibility? For me, I don't think it is, because, again, based off of the evidence in what the Bible says, I just don't see it like that. But the Bible doesn't say one way or another if there is life in outer space or not. I agree with that. It doesn't say. It just doesn't say. But the Bible does talk about interdimensional beings. It talks about demons and angels and spiritual beings and all of that. It doesn't say where they're necessarily coming from besides the heavens, but that's not talking about necessarily up in the sky. It's talking about the spiritual realm.
Basically, you shouldn't say that it was targeting the solar system as a possibility. It's definitely a comet, according to the editor. And that was just the early days. We didn't have much data at that time. Just to show you how science operates these days. So I said, okay, well, I want it to be published. So I took out that sentence. And then, the rebel that I am, I wrote a full paper on the technological option. And in that paper, in collaboration with 2 other authors, that was peer-reviewed and published, just to show you that this editor was out of line, because this paper was eventually published, peer-reviewed. And we showed that also, the fact that it was targeting the inner solar system is supported by the trajectory, which is aligned with the plane of the planets within 5 degrees. And the chance of that happening at random, if you consider all incoming orbits, only 1 in 500 will be so aligned with the planets. And
1 in 500.
Yeah, and this is the 3rd object. So, again,
we've only been monitoring these interstellar objects for how long?
About 8 years.
About 8 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So since about roughly 2017.
Yeah, 2017 is when the first one was discovered by the telescope in Hawaii that was looking for...
Oumuamua, right?
Yeah, Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And that one was just found. It was flagged because it came near Earth. And this survey telescope was trying to find near-Earth objects that pose a threat, because Congress tasked NASA to find 90% of all objects bigger than a football field. And this survey telescope was constructed to find near-Earth objects. Then it found Oumuamua, but realized that it's moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. And so that's how interstellar objects are flagged. You see an object moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun, and therefore it must have arrived from outside the solar system. So they discovered it by complete coincidence. Then a couple of years later, I found, together with my student, Amir Siraj, we found a meteor. In other words, an object that collided with Earth, 0.5 meter in size, in a catalog of fireballs that, again, NASA compiled based on US government satellites that monitor the Earth all the time for nuclear ballistic missiles. Obviously, we know that a lot of ballistic missiles were launched from Iran, last year. And so there is a network of infrared sensors looking at the Earth for flashes of heat.
Satellites and stuff.
Yeah, satellites. And those existed back in 2014. And they noticed a fireball from an object colliding with Earth. So that was definitely should not be classified. So they released it to the scientific community and said, here is a meteor, and documented the speed by which it was moving. And all we did was look at that speed and realize, well, it was moving at 60 kilometers per second relative to the sun outside the solar system. If we go back in time, this object was moving as fast as ThreeI Atlas. And so we said it's an interstellar meteor. That's it. And then the paper was not accepted for publication because the referee, the reviewer, said, we don't believe the US government data. So at the time I was...
Who said they don't believe the US government data?
The reviewer of the paper. In an astrophysics journal.
Someone sitting in a university somewhere?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. You have to understand the government is very believable because they discovered flashes of gamma rays back in the late 1960s with Vela satellites that were aimed to monitor any nuclear explosions above the atmosphere. Back then, there was an agreement with Russia, with the Soviet Union, but the US wanted to verify that the Soviets are actually not exploding anything.
Right.
And then they looked for gamma ray flashes and found every day or so there is a flash. So I'm sure in the first few days there was an alarm in Washington, D.C. But then they realized it comes from the rest of the universe. And so it was declassified and eventually reported. These are gamma ray bursts. Turns out they come from the edge of the universe, from massive stars that collapse to make black holes. And then the black holes, as the matter is funneled towards the black holes, you get jets being produced of outflows. So the matter forms a disk of material that spirals just like water going down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, some of the material ends up being collimated in 2 jets that are perpendicular to the
black
disk.
hole?
the disk of material around
This is
it.
what you see around the black hole.
You see that for big.
I think, in my opinion, all of this just puts into perspective how small we are. Like, how insignificant in a way compared to the entire universe. Like, when we have this prideful, arrogant mind and thinking that the entire universe revolves around me, but in all of reality, we're like the size of an ant, even smaller compared to the rest of the universe. Like, nothing can compare. And that puts into perspective how vast, how amazing, how wonderfully powerful, complex who God is. But also, it's amazing that he cares for us, tiny people. That's amazing. That's awesome. We're so thankful for all that God has done and has given us the ability to be made in the image of God and to have a relationship with God is truly, truly beautiful. Like, there's nothing that can comprehend that. We don't even understand the complexity and the marvelous thing that is. It's absolutely amazing.
I realized another anomaly of ThreeI Atlas that I never thought about before. And that is, the path of ThreeI Atlas takes it closest to Jupiter on March 16th. 2026. And it's possible to forecast the distance that it will have from Jupiter on March 16th. Turns out that this distance, to within 4 significant digits, is exactly the distance from Jupiter where Jupiter's gravity wins over the Sun's gravity. So the Sun's gravity introduces a tidal effect. Basically, it rips apart any satellite of Jupiter that is beyond this distance, which is called the Hill radius.
Wow.
The Hill radius.
Yeah, it was discovered by a physicist with that last name.
And this is around the entire circumference of Jupiter.
Well, it's around Jupiter, and out to that distance, if you put a satellite, it can remain bound to Jupiter. If you put it outside, it will be torn apart from Jupiter by the sun.
And why is that?
And by the way, this distance depends on time, because as Jupiter goes around the sun, the distance between Jupiter and the sun changes slightly. And so I calculated it on March 16th, and then you find to within 4 significant digits, it's the same. Now,
within 4 significant digits, what do you mean by that?
I mean that it's the number that you get for the distance is identical to 4 digits. Now, there is some uncertainty in the forecast. The uncertainty puts it in agreement with the value that we know should be the Hill radius for Jupiter on that date. Now, the plot gets
so on
thicker.
March 16th, the ThreeI Atlas is going to be underneath that,
just exactly at that distance.
At the distance to where it will be able to be like in the orbit of Jupiter.
Yeah, so there are the so-called Lagrange points, if you're familiar with that. These are the points where if you put a satellite, you need very little maneuvering or fuel supply to keep it there, because there is almost zero gravity there. So the attraction to Jupiter is balanced by the gravity of the sun. And so the Lagrange points, L1 and L2, the 2 first Lagrange points, are exactly on the Hill radius, on the Hill sphere. But anyway, so turns out that there was some non-gravitational acceleration observed for ThreeI Atlas, meaning that when it came closest to the sun during the month of October, it deviated from the original path a little bit. And that level of deviation, I calculated, allows it to come exactly at the Hill radius. If it didn't have the non-gravitational acceleration, it would have been off. And so the question arises as to whether the non-gravitational acceleration resulted from some engine that gave it, provided it with adjustments to its trajectory, and did it close to the sun.
So he's saying that it had some electronic or like technology to get it to the exact point where it didn't have to deal with the gravity pull of Jupiter. That's fascinating. I don't know, guys. It's also interesting. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. That is for sure. What is going on? Does this have anything to do with the end times prophecies, or we way off here? Anyway, I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. That is for sure. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. And always remember, guys, Jesus loves you.